Ah, welcome back. Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about this concept of engaged anthropologists. These are slightly different than your standard cultural anthropologist or even applied anthropologist. Cultural anthropologists are usually they're there to learn about the culture, try to understand that culture. Engaged anthropologists are oftentimes more connected to being active within the community, being active participants when trying to deal with certain issues. In fact, oftentimes they're considered activists. Okay, so when you look at like social injustice or poverty or racial injustice, all of these things, there are a number of anthropologists that use the skills that they have gained through the process of anthropology and then work them into how to create social change, how to understand what's going into this. And they are oftentimes very committed to revealing, critiquing, and confronting systems of power, and trying to create not only an understanding, but oftentimes a pathway to fighting systems of injustice. And this doesn't fall so far within like cultural anthropology because, again, a lot of what cultural anthropology is doing is trying to understand and not necessarily to engage or interrupt. So, and a lot of engaged anthropologists are oftentimes working within large, oftentimes like industrial countries. So, if there's issues within like the United States or Great Britain or Canada or, the rest of Europe, you might find a lot of engaged anthropologists working within these areas, but you might not find a lot of them working in areas where small populations or indigenous populations, because they're usually not the places that need that kind of work. So it's one more process that an anthropologist might consider going down. So how do anthropologists get started? So as an exercise, I want you to kind of think about what are the things that you might need before going to do some research. What are some things that you might need to get or to do before you go in and start doing active research with a group? What kind of tools might you need before you go into the field? And these different ideas have changed primarily over time due to technology, right? What do we have access to? What kind of tools can we use? What kind of things can we bring with us? And also, there is a certain amount of time that can be associated with this as well. A lot of early anthropologists would spend months, if not years, and sometimes more, working within a community to understand it and to do all that. A lot of modern day anthropologists don't usually spend that much time within a community because it's not always as practical. There might be other reasons, but it's also easier to travel, right? Early anthropologists were limited by, how they could travel around. And if you went someplace where there was a ship that sailed there every 6 months, you were there for 6 months. And if and that's how often you would get correspondence. So if you worked for a university or for a government or for a church, then yeah, that's how often you would get any correspondence, any information from your home, and that's how often they would hear from you. That has obviously changed. So talking about how we engage in with tools and communication and the ability to travel can have a huge impact on what we do. So preparation, there's a couple of things that we like to do before, we do literature reviews, right? Who's been there before us? Has there been previous research done, and what's available? Because here's the thing, a lot of people have been doing this for a long time already. And so it's kind of rare that you're going to be stepping into something brand new. And there's lots of stuff out there too that even if you are going someplace that hasn't had a lot of research done, there are other places that are oftentimes similar. And if you get an idea of what those similarities might be, you might have a better understanding of what you might be able to anticipate later on. Learning the language, and that actually goes for a lot of things. Whether or not you're working within a foreign culture, so a culture outside of your country or territory that speaks an altogether different language, versus understanding, say, like a technical language. Say you're working in the United States, but you're working with doctors. Well, doctors have a technical language. This is a language that they develop over their years of education that most individuals don't know, don't understand. But if you work within that field, you have to learn this technical language that goes along with it. And so you will also have to learn that language. Goodness gracious. Okay. So learning that language is really important to understand how things work within that community. You can contact other researchers, folks that have done that kind of work. They've been in this field for a long time. They might have some insight. They might be able to give you some idea of things to watch out for, give you kind of like a not necessarily a preview, but hopefully give you an understanding of what you might be stepping into. And that's really important. You want to, take that information and realize that that was their experience and you're going to have your own experience. And so when you do that, then you're like, okay, now I know what's going to happen. I've got an idea of what to expect, but not always expect exactly the same thing to happen, because oftentimes you might be going to a different community and there might be different expectations and there might be different experiences that you're going to have. So it's good to prepare, but not to set firmly in your expectations on wherever you're going. You also need to contact like your local and national government, or the local and national government. You need to have permission to go there, right? That's kind of important. And gaining that information, being able to say, okay, these are the things we're going to be experiencing. This is the stuff that we need to prepare for. And I think that's really, really important to make sure that you do, so that you don't get in trouble. And that's a big aspect of doing anthropology, is you don't want to get into trouble. Contacting community leaders, they're often the ones that are going to be able to like set you up within the community, be able to direct you towards people that you're going to need to meet, to understand, and that can give you sort of like, they become sort of gatekeepers to that community. So getting to know them can help you a long ways within that community, even just setting you up a place to live, and the kind of resources that you might need. Funding, money, yeah, it's really important. How are you going to pull this off? What is it that you're going to need to do? A lot of times you might be working as an anthropologist. We oftentimes work for universities or for governmental entities, but we still have to get money to go do projects. And so, there are places that we can go and basically apply for grants to do different types of research. And a lot of times you need that, because doing research and spending, a couple of months or 6 months or a year in a foreign location isn't always cheap, right? So that's something to always consider. And then also doing like an early site visit, going there in the first place, getting sort of like a lay of the land, and this might only take like a few days or a week or something like that, where you go and you might set up some of those general contacts, and just get an idea of what it's going to be like, and then you come back and then you can prepare more, before you actually go out into the field. We have to talk about the toolkit. What is it that we would bring? Old timers, they would go into the field and they'd have reams of paper and their notebooks and all this stuff, and that's all they basically had to take with them. So they would take all their notes, and sometimes it'd be massive quantities. Sometimes. Now, of course, everything is digital, right? We can take our laptop and we can take our cameras and stuff like that. And as long as we've got a source of power, even if we have to bring a generator with us or something like that, we have a different means of recording things, and we have more ways of sort of understanding and creating pictures for people, for us to go back and revisit. I think that's a really cool aspect about doing anthropology, is the tools that we had now. It's one of the reasons why I became a visual anthropologist, because I love photography and I love video. And I feel like the ability to use these types of mediums to capture information is much more beneficial than just writing it down. And that's not to knock writing things down. In fact, making field notes is one of the most important things that you will do while working in the field, and getting to understand what it's like to be an anthropologist, and to write your thoughts down, your emotions, your expectations, and all of these things can help us understand, not only at the time, but later on, what our thought process was. There's all kinds of tools that we can take into the field with us, and it's just getting more and more interesting as we go. Once we're in the field, there's two different types of data that we really try and collect. We have quantitative data, which gives us an idea about how things are sort of counted, how things are. We can take data that we can compare, so we could be looking at like population, data on population, and what people are doing what, and how many people live there, and studying economic structures and all of that kind of stuff. Then we have qualitative data, and qualitative data is focused much more on sort of the personalized information. What are people's life histories, and doing participant observation, and trying to understand the individual and where they fit within that community. And so there's these two kind of rather big data sets that we oftentimes gather, and then do our best to interpret both at the same time. I think one of the best explanations that I had ever seen about comparing these two is, if you were to say, like, take a chessboard, okay, and on this chessboard, if we're looking at quantitative data, we're going to go through and count how many squares there are on a chessboard. We're going to see what the distribution of, say, like white and black squares are. We're going to see how many chess pieces there are. And then what is their relationship to each other. You've got 8 pawns, and then you've got like 8 ranked pieces. And then, and we're going to take a look at how all of these things are sort of organized. If we look at qualitative data, the qualitative data is going to show us how each of these chess pieces move, right? And what is their relationship to the board? And then we would look at like strategies. How would we use these chess pieces? So on one side, we're looking at what is all there, right? What the chessboard is and how it's organized and how many pieces there are and how those different pieces are organized. And then we're going to look at the qualitative data and how each individual pieces are used and how they work in conjunction to each other. So that might be one way of sort of coming to an understanding of how these two data sets are oftentimes used. So here's another exercise to kind of consider. Pick a subject, right? And I suggest doing something like with politics or religion or within your own community. And then using qualitative and quantitative research methods, right? How would you analyze any aspect of that subject? Okay. So for example, I put, say, like Christianity. How would we study Christianity using both quantitative and qualitative research methods? Well, for, say, quantitative, we would want to look at, well, how many people are practicing members of Christianity, how many members are divided up into the different branches within Christianity. How many years has it been practiced? How do we divide things up? How do we basically count all the numbers, right? Then we have qualitative information, and that's what are the practices, right? Who does them? Who does? You've got a priest, or you've got someone that's going to be in charge, right? And how do they organize everything? How do they, you've got sort of like, you've got the Catholics versus the Lutherans versus the Baptists. You've got all these different ways of practicing, Are you going to be the super strict and regimented, going to a Greek Orthodox church? Or are you going to be involved in the really cool Southern Baptist singing and stuff that you might find in an African American church? So you've got Christianity going on, but it's being practiced in two very distinct ways. And so how do you compare those? How do you get a better understanding of what might be happening within these communities? And so it's all about how people behave and about how they practice these general ideas in their lives. And so that's one way that we might look at how would we research Christianity. Christianity is a massively broad subject, but think about it and put it in the discussion. What do you think about a particular subject, and how would you address it? Okay, I think we're going to stop there again for another break, and then we will come back and discuss some of the different ways in which we are going to gain information and talk about anthropology and research and what we do. Okay, we'll see you in a few.